Catus Maximus here. This is a quick video about bayonet saw blades and just a quick comparison of the variety that I have. Definitely not quite as many, or quite the variety, I should say, as the T Shank jigsaw blades, which is what have become the standard. For a while, there were U-shank jigsaws, and some older jigsaws use these. The blades tend to be shorter, and of course, their retention mechanism just uses a set screw on the side of the blade, so that has fallen out of favor because those set screws are a hassle to deal with, and the blades will want to slip out. So that's why the T-shank comes in, because it goes in sideways and then goes into a slot and is positively retained down low, and so it has some tang beyond that, so it maintains a bit of rigidity, and that's what the modern jigsaw is. Bayonet saws were essentially a heavy-duty version of a jigsaw, and I believe they actually are what had come out first, but quickly soon thereafter there was the U-shank. And over time, the bayonet saw, as well as the U-shank, has kind of been lost to the annals of history. Although if you hunt around online, you can find some blades. They're all kind of general purpose like these. What we have here is some Porter cable blades, which tend to be the most common because they had the most popular versions of these bayonet saws. And we can see we have a super short blade, which doesn't even really have an indent. It just kind of hooks on over the top. And then most of these blades are just going to be similar to jigsaw blades. Like this Swiss-made one may very well be made in the same factory as the Bosch's, just because it has essentially an identical cut pattern as this actual Swiss-made Bosch. And that tends to be with a lot of the Swiss-made blades. So the Porter cables were Swiss-made, and they were pretty nice. We have a longer one here just for doing tighter radiuses, more of a heavy-duty fast cutting. And then this would be fleam ground, so it's super sharp, two bevels. That provides much cleaner cut. The Porter cable blades have always been a reasonable thickness. If we take and say compare to a Swiss-made blade, but kind of a no-name one, we can see that the Porter cable blades were just a little bit thicker. And then I have a Lennox here, and the Lennox, I believe, is one of the brands that you can still find. They put a hole in here, and this is actually so that it weakens the blade. So if it gets jammed, the tang will break off, potentially avoiding additional damage. But I never liked that, because the deal with these bayonet saws is they were really good for metal cutting. If you had to cut sheet metal, 1/4 inch, 3/8 aluminum, all that kind of stuff, a bayonet saw was really good for that. So we can see the Porter cable, and then a no-name Swiss, and then the Lennox is actually really pretty thin. The Rockwells were what was always the best. Rockwell is, I believe, who invented it. And we can see that the Rockwell blades are just a little bit thicker than the Porter cable, and they're actually the thickest I've seen. So that was kind of the original deal, is they had very thick, very heavy-duty blades. These saws actually look a lot like jigsaws. Here is a Rockwell one that looks just like a jigsaw, except for it's a bayonet saw. It just has a screw that goes through a lug, and then the blade is just simply clamped there. And then what holds it in is the screw itself. So the whole idea is that if you ever had any issues, it was pretty easy to replace the screw, and then it's just a square nut with a hole through the arbor. So a bit heavier duty. There were versions of saws, such as this Porter cable here. This is a worm drive bayonet saw. They also had a tilting base, but this one just has the flat base. This is also inherently orbiting, but it's a bit different. These type of Porter cables were super heavy duty, really great, and can essentially be used continuously. They just had a ton of power, only a 1/2 inch of stroke. But the whole deal with the way the orbiting, at least on that Porter cable, works is much different than the way it is on jigsaws. Jigsaws tend to pivot inside the head, so when they orbit, they have a little wheel that kind of kicks the blade. It goes down, and then the blade kind of kicks out at an angle and then kind of draws up at an angle. The same thing with reciprocating saws that orbit. They usually come, they all do. They all come, the pivot rocks up the anvil, and it pivots, and the blade points downward and kind of comes at an angle. The difference with that Porter cable I just showed is it's actually parallel orbiting, and that does make a big difference. It makes the blades last longer, significantly longer, especially in metal cutting operations, and it actually goes faster, because the way it works is the blade will go down and then will come over and then go straight up in a parallel fashion. So it's the very same thing as if you're doing a cut, lifting up the saw, and then doing a cut, only cutting in the proper direction and actually not putting pressure backing up and not putting excessive pressure on towards the end, because of course a pivoting orbiting system will, the end of the blade will move more than the back part of the blade. Or on the Porter cable, the whole entire blade moves in parallel and it moves the same amount. It goes down, pushes, there's your orbit, pulls up to give you a nice cut, and then actually backs off again, goes down and pushes. And so that small fundamental difference in geometry is really what made these particular Porter cables here so famous, so long lasting, and so popular, is because it wasn't so much that the blades would really last much longer. It was just that it had a better form of operation. Unfortunately, that was an expensive tool, and just not enough people put the kind of use on them that they were really intended for. And so Bosch really, with their excellent, really low vibration Cintia jigsaws, pretty much took over the market. And then the Bashas T Shank, which is their invention, or actually I should say Cintia's invention, this ended up completely just becoming the standard, which is a shame. So anyway, now you have an idea of the kind of saws that use these blades. Some look very strange like the Porter cable, and it's obvious. Some look like that Rockwell, which looks like a jigsaw, except for it has just a really big square plunger on it. And those type of saws use these types of blades. Anyway, that was kind of the point of the video, just to show you a quick variety of those bayonet saw blades and the saws, and give you an idea of just kind of what made them so nice. And part of it was just a really reliable anvil system that just had a super reliable tension, or excuse me, blade retention, along with pretty stubby and very rigid heavy duty blades. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.